Welcome to Season 9 of Eyes and Teeth, Voices of Variety. Simon Cartwright and I, only a few years apart, appeared on some of the same TV talent shows, and we both perform voices for a living. But I have to tell you, he's not only incredibly talented and dedicated to perfecting those voices, but Simon goes that extra mile to look like them. And you can see that as he tours as Frankie Howard or Bob Monkhouse, he's a disciplined master of his craft, and it actually gives me chills and blows me away when watching him at work. Today on Eyes and Teeth, we talk about greats of TV including Lenny Henry, Ray Allen, Des O'Connor, Hilary O'Neill, Bob Monkhouse, and Simon reveals what skills he uses to portray these comedy icons. Yes, I'm a fan, and I love the passion and dedication he gives that shows in his results. Welcome to Eyes and Teeth, episode 116, Simon Cartwright.
Steve Hewlett, how are you?
Simon, sir, thank you so much for doing this.
When you mentioned ventriloquism, obviously that's your forte, and I'm a great fan of your work. And
Oh, thank you.
But you just put to mind Ray Allen and Lord Charles,
Genius.
who I actually saw live at the Fairfield Halls in Croydon in 1986. It was actually the Bob Monkhouse Christmas show, and I think he ran it for about 4 nights. Just jam-packing the Fairfield Halls, which is a really big room. But Ray Allen actually compared the whole evening and then did a spot. But, oh, my goodness me, that man was immaculate from head to tail, just such professionalism, and had the same agent as Bob, Peter Pritchard.
He did, yes.
What a great performer, and made me rethink about ventriloquism, in terms of how classy and sophisticated it can be.
Yes, I'm trying to add a little bit of sophistication into my act, but I'll never be as immaculate as Ray Allen. He was a genius, his book taught me when I was 12 years old, so it was a very big part of my childhood, Ray Allen.
There's some beautiful routine that I always cherish. I've got it on video somewhere where he's actually got Lord Charles himself with a vent doll as well. It's like a three-way conversation. It's just extraordinary.
I think that was 3-2-1, or the Paul Daniels Magic Show. But yeah, that's very renowned, that clip. It's such a great clip. And very clever and very, very much copied these days by a few other vents. Yeah. But the greats are, you learn by the best, I guess. And that's a lovely thing to be part of. I'm excited to talk with Simon. I'm an admirer of yours, sir, and the work I've seen so far, I'm so impressed. I mean, when you're talking with impressionists and puppeteers and actors, I found that shyness was quite a part of younger years. Did you ever have that introverted characteristic yourself, Simon?
Joy to talk to you. Thank you so much for the invitation. And just a quick response to that, I think I still am. I started out life as a desperately shy classical musician, but there you go, taking up the guitar and giving concerts. It was a shield. And because of shyness in real life, I think there was this sort of frustration around trying to sort of conquer an audience and face your demons. So I could do it with music because I could hide behind the instrument. But then, of course, absolutely, you find comedy, which is the greatest tonic for any kind of melancholy or shyness or whatever, but to get laughs and to do it as someone else, again, you've got the shield, or being an actor, it's a way of shy people getting out there whilst being protected. So I do agree with that hypothesis you put.
I certainly found that. I was like a teacher's pet. I hid behind the teachers, and I found my way through the characters. It's because I really shocked my parents because I was such a shy child. And they could not believe that I wanted to work on the stage, So it's always that, that sort of early years when you're sort of growing and you actually want to do something your parents would never have dreamed you would do. But there we are, and here we are.
It's an interesting skill, and I think it's a bit like magic. Whether it's magic, whether it's comedy, as a child, you discover it's quite a potent, powerful drug in a way. Clever people learn to manipulate it. I mean, I befriended all the thugs and the bullies in the school because I'd imitate teachers, and they'd look after me. I'd be hiding behind the thugs. But if you can get laughs, you can get approval. It's certainly a way that some people cope.
Yeah, and I heard an interview recently with Lenny Henry, and he was talking about being bullied in the playground, and that they were actually literally kicking him and hitting him. And he was saying, "Oh, you keep beating me up, but you just want to get close to me and hug me and kiss me." And and they started,
Killing with kindness.
yeah, his friends around him started laughing, and the bully's friends were laughing, and they started to say, "Leave him alone." This kid's funny, and he doesn't want to be beat up. And so, but Lenny Henry, what a story that is.
Absolutely, and I, funny enough, a few years ago, I went to. I'm sure we're going to end up talking about Bob Monkhouse at some point. Let me start it off. But I went to a BAFTA event maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and actually the clip was played of Lenny Henry's first formal television appearance, because obviously he came through the New Faces route, I believe.
Yes.
But he appeared on an episode of The Golden Shot as a guest.
Okay.
And it was just, and of course, Bob being an incredible collector of everything that was ever broadcast, it's Noah's Ark. We were able to watch it, and you could just see the raw talent of Lenny, as a 16, 17-year-old young guy, just multifaceted and determined to be successful. You could see the industry in him. He would have faced a lot of barriers and battles that you and I maybe wouldn't have had to as well, in that particular time in history of showbiz. But yeah, I agree with you. Amazing, talented man. I like to think of him as a performer rather than narrow him down to saying impressionist or comedian or actor. He's just like
absolutely
a performer.
Yes. Yeah, truly brilliant. I've seen him live once, and he was, it's such a big, national treasure, wasn't he, back then, and even now. And I remember hearing about it. It may be the same tape you're talking about, but Bob Monkhouse, he taped everything, didn't he, back then? And the first appearance of every performer on TV, all the comedians, he kept them.
I think Bob it was part of his pathology that he was quite probably a kleptomaniac. He'd had an obsessive streak. So I understand he was one of the very first few people in the UK to ever own a video recorder, as it would have been in those days, and to that end a satellite dish. I mean, I remember going up to his house in Eggington, where he used to live, in fact, where he died eventually.
Right.
And before they sold it on and cleared it out, you could see in his back garden this enormous satellite dish. I mean, it was just gigantic. It was like something from NASA. And because he was beaming in material from the States, as far back as the 1970s. And again, just constantly researching, finding out what they were doing the other side over in America, and assimilating all that information, and I think to inform his own performance and what he would eventually end up doing on stage. But yeah, absolutely collected everything. Nothing was thrown away. I think somebody once said his dustbin was his nemesis.
Yeah. Oh, I know about the VHS tapes. I've still got a VHS player in my spare room, and the tapes are next to it, but I'm kind of going through them one by one now. Think, do I need that anymore? And it is kind of, you don't want to let go of them.
Isn't it? And there's lots of commercial breaks that you have to deal with.
I love watching them though. They're the best thing about the 80s, aren't they?
I think there are some websites that specialise in archive adverts.
Is there?
People are crazy about them. But they were a joy. I think ads certainly I was born in 1965, so I've got a fairly good memory of television throughout the 70s, and I used to think, some of those wonderful ads for whatever it was, Harmony hairspray, Flake,
Flake was always up there.
They were such mini stories. I mean, the R. White's lemonade, just fantastic.
The man in the glasses, fantastic. Yeah, they were funny. They're so humorous back then, weren't they? Really funny adverts, and they're kind of serious.
They were like
today.
Ongoing stories, some of them, weren't they? Like the coffee one where you just revisit, it'd be like a soap opera. The next ad out would be the next part of the story.
Oh.
Very clever. It's all changed now. It's all very different.
Linda Bellingham and her husband, who played her husband. I sat next to him at a dinner once at Variety Club, and lovely fella.
I'm trying to think now, but she was the Bisto lady, wasn't
she?
She
was, yes.
I think.
Yeah, you felt like you kind of grew up with them on the TV, but I mean, talking about, I'm going to mention some names now. I'm going to talk about Des O'Connor, Cliff Richard, Jimmy Tarbuck, Stephen Mulhern. They were redcoats. Lots of talented people started out that way. Ringo Starr was a resident drummer at Skegness. Is Butlins where you cut your teeth, Simon?
I would say to you, I started to cut my teeth as a classical guitarist. I mean,
Okay.
I set out in life with the intention of becoming a professional classical guitarist, giving concerts forevermore.
Right.
To the extent that I managed to get into the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. So that was my line of dedication.
Yes.
The trouble was, I think when I was at Music and Drama College, it's either a blessing or otherwise, but I got so distracted by the acting department, and it was just like it opened up a world of possibility for me. And I found a way in because they had things like student reviews where anyone who was connected with the building could just get up on stage and do some stuff. And that's where I found my voice as an impressionist, to be honest. And curiously, that's where I met Alistair McGowan for the very first time. He was joining the college as I was about to graduate, but we made a connection then, and he was a very talented, serious actor then, and he said to me, I like those things you do called impressions. Can you tell me how you do them? And eventually we ended up doing some stuff together. But I knew that I had to go and cut my teeth at talking to people, talking to audiences about anything, because I still had that real shy streak.
Yes.
And exactly for the reasons you've explained, I did a lot of research and reading, and of course everybody said, you want to go and work in a holiday centre, you need to go and work to an audience without a script and deal with any situation to be able to multitask, not look like a wally, or if you do, get a laugh out of it. And so, of course, Butlins, I had to go and do that. And I did a season at the Ocean Hotel in Brighton, which is long gone now. That was Saltine.
Yes. Yeah, I remember. I went there a few times.
It was a great experience. I'd also worked at another private holiday centre. It was about 70p an hour or something, and you were working 23 hours a day. But it didn't matter. It really didn't matter, because you would see the visiting artists.
That's where you'd learn.
We had sort of Little and Large, and all of the names and the has-beens even, because they do those retro weekends. But if you were doing the spotlight, you were still part of that and soaking up performance style and obviously accidentally borrowing and redesigning gags that you might have heard.
Yes.
But everyone was doing that, and great experience. I think had I not done that, I probably wouldn't have progressed into sort of doing it professionally, because it just gave me... Well, I'll tell you a strange thing. Years later, I did a stint at a local BBC radio. Don't know how that came about, but the reality was that I was able to just talk to anybody about anything unscripted. I just say, all I need to know is a name, a location, and a starting point, and we'll talk. How long do you want? And to this day, I don't know where it comes from. It's just like a channeled ramble, really. But I think it does come from Butlins. Partly.
Right.
Just unleash this ability to talk to anyone about anything.
It's amazing.
And hopefully make them feel relaxed enough to, respond in the same way.
Yeah, it's very brave to do that, because you need to have a beginning, middle and an end for an act, don't you? But if you're using improvisation skills, that is another skill to have in your arsenal. That's so brave as well to have that.
Do you know what? It takes the pressure off, because if you are on a scripted routine or something, I mean, I'm doing straight acting parts at the moment, but it gives you a confidence, because you kind of think, well, look, if all else fails, I'm not going to freeze. I'll have a conversation with the front row.
Yes.
It's funny, and I think it's
a comfort.
You and I, people in light entertainment, we've sort of got that ability to go, well, actually, if the script doesn't happen, there will still be some kind of event or show. It will flow. We won't grind to a halt and run off, looking terrified.
Eyes and Teeth.
Yes, that's totally true. I opened a show last year all about one character. It's the life of Arthur Largo, which is my old man character. And I wrote a show about him like being born up until the age 82. And I got 5 different puppets throughout his life. And so he grows up during the show. But so I wrote this script, which is an hour show. And I've always done cabaret and I've always picked on people in the front row. But this was no communication with the audience. I think I kind of forgot one of the new lines because it was work in progress, and my puppet started to talk to a lady on the front row, and then And then that became, the next night, that became a running gag. And so because he was 7 years old, he talked to the lady on the front row as a child. Then he was a teenager. Then he was in his 40s. But he fancied her every 20 years of his life till he got to 82. So it actually helped me in a way rewrite that piece, which is quite a serious piece with a lot of humour sort of attached to it, which is nice. So yeah, I guess that skill is nice to have in the back of your mind.
And take advantage of it. I mean, obviously, yes. if you're in a scripted production where the lines matter, of course, you don't upset a director or a producer. But I think that's right. It's about having the confidence to do exactly what you did. Take that risk, do that little bit of experimentation. If it doesn't work, nobody knows. You'll never do it again. But look, you found some gold in doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the sign of a really creative performer, intuitive.
Oh, wow. I never thought I was, but I'll take that. So,
add that to the list.
Simon, you and I are not strangers to TV talent shows. Now, you appeared on Sky Star Search.
Yes. In the days before comedy was funny, I appeared on there.
Yeah, Keith Chegwin. Keith Chegwin. He was a presenter on that, wasn't he, Keith?
Do you know, I just never understood that show. They taped it at the old London Weekend television studios at South Bank, Upper Ground.
Okay.
And it was just this rolling carousel of people of all ages and stages, most of them unhindered by any form of talent, I would say. And they just sort of went on, and usually they were laughed at. I don't know why I think it was the very early days of Sky actually coming on air, but it was quite a novelty. I don't think it had a big viewership.
No.
Thank goodness. But actually, I went on because it was just experience. And I think I did it after I'd appeared on Opportunity Knock. So I'd kind of lost my television virginity terror, as it were, and had the confidence to go and do it again.
Okay.
But Keith Chegwin, jolly chap. I mean, all the information, the bio was wrong. Somehow I'd come from the Royal College of Music when it was very obviously the Guildhall, and this and that and this and that. And I thought, okay, well, that's that. But I tell you what, I met two amazing people and chatted to them afterwards. One was Bonnie Langford, who was a judge.
Yes.
And in those days, I mean, she still is a very, very beautiful lady, but I mean, she was absolutely radiant and stunning in those days, and just so positive and enthusiastic, because she understands the business, right from the get-go. And the other particular judge on my episode was a comedy actor, Derek Nimmo.
Oh, definitely, very
he was
distinguished.
Very complimentary and spoke like that. I think one of the characters I did was Kenneth Williams, and he knew Kenneth very well and was very complimentary, but just nice people. And I think if you had any sense of talent, the judges would be half decent to you. But look, we've got to say this is a long way from BGT. This is the very early formations of things, really.
Definitely, yeah. That and Pot of Gold. Me and you done Pot of Gold. I got the 30 seconds. I got nowhere, but you had a brilliant set on there with Des O'Connor.
Do you know what, Steve? That was the funniest. When you really want something, you don't get it. When you really struggle and you say, I want to get on this. I saw an ad. It was, I don't know, a Friday afternoon. No, it was a Friday morning, actually. I saw this ad in Stage and Television Today, and it said, I don't know, variety acts wanted for brand new TV series. I rang the number, and by 6 o'clock that evening, I was doing some kind of act in an office in LWT, and I got booked. And not only that, I then get cut into the main trailer and appear in the first episode of the series. I actually got slaughtered by the judges, I would say. No, Gary Bushell was fair and fine, but there was another lady in the audience, and I always remember this thinking, there is a risk to talent shows, because yes, you've got exposure, but in that particular format, which I'm given to understand Des didn't particularly like, I'll tell you more about that sort of in a bit, but he, there was a lady, they apparently pulled out a random member of the audience to act as the sort of the people's voice. And I always remember her opening line was, well, I don't like impressionists, so he's not going to do very well with me. And I thought, oh, well, there you go, all that effort for that.
Wow.
But look, I got some exposure from it, and I got to meet Des O'Connor, who was and continues to be an inspiration. What a really nice guy.
Yes.
Really, really. And to see him do his warm-up and all the little bits between the takes.
Oh, that was great.
The final edit.
Yeah.
I mean, that man just, I can only describe it as massaging that whole audience and keeping them, a very funny man. I mean, he
was,
really
yeah.
was a comedian.
He knew his audience, didn't he?
More so than a singer in a chat show. He was a funny man.
It's amazing the history that Des O'Connor had, and we think of him as a singer, and then Morecambe and Wise would tell you otherwise. But then he was a great stand-up, and that's why he loved so many comedians on the Des O'Connor show. He would create careers, wouldn't he, on that show?
I think he was a very intelligent man, and I think one of his strengths was underplaying. There was a beautiful sensitivity around his sort of performance and delivery. It was the less is more, but just he knew when to put the pressure on something, but could just sort of... I've never seen a television presenter who can just stand there and make it look so easy,
yes,
so natural, without sort of getting on your nerves. He just oozed this. I think some people were born to be on the screen. I think obviously Bob Monkhouse was another one of those, but Des just had a real natural charisma and a charm that you can't fake it, you can't make it, you just have it, I think.
Oh, contributional.
You did do a few more talent competitions. You won Search for a Star, which was the Nationals, wasn't it?
I tell you what, that was a bit of a caravan ride, I must say. It all started one day when, I think it was in the mid-90s, and I was going, I could really do with doing a bit of performing, and the diary's a bit empty. And I saw these adverts for Search for a Star, but they're all at local resorts all around the UK, various sort of settings. So at the time I was living in Croydon, I think, and I drove down to Eastbourne and just sort of did a 10-minute spot in the, I can't remember where it was now, it might have been the Connaught Theatre, possibly.
Congress, is it?
Very well. Won it, got through to the semi-finals, got through to the finals, and I thought, this is a bit good because there's prize money involved. Anyway, I started doing this all around the place, and then one day I drove up to Bridlington, won it, got into the semis, got into the finals.
Wow.
So it got to a point where I got into the finals and won the finals in I think, two places. So I couldn't represent two towns. I had to sort of be one or the other. So Eastbourne had to me come second, so that I could therefore represent Bridlington to go to the national final, which was at the Spa Theatre up in Scarborough.
Yes.
And so that's what I did. And won it. I was just very lucky, by the way. I was very lucky. I drew lots. I think it was like ping pong balls, and I got number 7 was my lucky number. And I ended up being the last act on. So I had the privilege a real advantage to watch the whole first half from the back of I went up in the goals.
Oh, great.
And looked down,
yeah, I always did
and
that.
I could map out some stagecraft, and I could see what, who did things well, where it was good to stand, where am I going to do that line. So it was almost like a mini technical rehearsal. So I definitely had the advantage. And the other thing is that by the time I got on, they were as warm as they were going to be as an audience, and
they were ready.
It was just one of those nights where it all fell into place. And you know what it's like yourself, master of comedy. The more laughs you get, the better you become. So
yes.
I walked out and I thought, it doesn't normally go this well.
You feed off it, don't you?
I did all the checks. No, the zipper was done up. That was fine. And kept going. And yeah, it was just one of those things. Now, on the back of that, one of the judges was a guy called Stanley Dallas. And he was part of a group, I believe, called the Dallas Boys, perhaps.
Oh, yes.
And he was part of International Artists. Anyway, through him, something else came along, and I ended up doing a revival of Who Do You Do, which was a sketch show from the 70s, but they did a kind of remake of it in 1995.
That's right.
So it's always worth trying these things, and I always say to people, it's luck plays a big part in getting breaks, finding work and opportunities.
Yeah.
But some of the most successful or productive things that have come towards me, I've made them happen. And I always say that to people, you have to put yourself out there. You have to, invite yourselves to things, make yourself needed, because nothing, unless you're in that top, echelon, nothing comes knocking on your door.
No.
There is no such thing as the phone ringing, spontaneously. It doesn't happen.
No, of course not. You have to work for it, don't you? And it's you don't know who's watching either. Whatever you're doing, you don't know who's going to be there at the back of that room, just making notes. And it's so great that you were kind of earmarked to do Who Do You Do in 1993. That show really bred a lot of great impressionists, didn't it? There was some great talent on there as well.
Oh, the original series. I mean, obviously the version I was in was interesting. There were lots of sort of unknowns, myself included in that. Interestingly, there was quite a few of the cast from the 1980 series Copycats.
Okay, yes.
And a dear friend of mine, Hilary O'Neill, who I just recently got in touch with, she was part of that. Mike Osman, Aidan J. Harvey. So those guys who were in Copycats sort of popped up in this. But yeah, the original series, back in the early 70s, you had Freddie Starr, for example, was part of that coterie.
Of course, yes.
Michael Barrymore.
Dave Evans.
So a lot of people came through on that sketch. A really simple sketch show idea, by the way. It wasn't a sophisticated format. It was just chop, 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 sketch.
I guess it's like the Comedians, wasn't it, where they kind of chopped up between each gag. It was like the Granada TV show. Yeah, well, that's fantastic. And then you find yourself an opportunity knocks, working with one of the top impressions that you do, that we will talk about, is obviously Bob Monkhouse, but doing it in front of the man himself and you saved it for the end of the spot. Was that your goal, to save it for that moment?
So I'd applied for Opportunity Knocks the previous year. So Bob did it for 3 seasons, 87 to 89. Obviously, the first run happened, and then I think I ended up for some reason, going up to Manchester to audition for the 1988 series, and didn't really have much of an act. I was just determined to get up there and do it. And the producer, Stuart Morris, is quite terrifying and said, "Go home, go away." Just the kind of encouragement you need. But he was right, because I was rubbish, and I needed some material and needed to sharpen a few things up. So that was the incentive, and came back the following year. So I think what happened was we did auditions at the Riverside Theatre, which has been recently reopened and revamped, which is great news, in Hammersmith in London. Then got the recall invitation, so I thought, oh, that's interesting. Wasn't expecting that. And was sitting in a pub opposite with a dear friend of mine who'd been on the previous year as a guitarist, and we were just sitting in this window having a coffee, and this car pulled up, and out jumped Bob Monkhouse, looking very smart with a pair of sunglasses on and a little briefcase. And I thought, oh, right, I didn't know Bob was going to be there, and Bob's kind of in my act. Ooh, what am I going to do? So I had this kind of little tension going through my head all the way through the audition. Now, the idea was I was going to, my last impression would be Bob Monkhouse, and then I'd go into a piece of guitar music, Cavatina or something.
Oh, wow.
And I was saying to myself mentally, no, you're not going to do it, because he's sitting about 2 meters away from you. You're not going to do Bob Monkhouse. You're not going to do Bob Monkhouse. But Bob laughed so much, very generously, I must add, at my act all the way up until I thought, do you know what? He's been so kind. I'm going to do this. And I did. But the story I always tell about this is that, it took a lot of courage to do an impersonation of Bob Monkhouse to Bob Monkhouse when he's sitting 2 meters away from you.
Yes.
I packed up very modestly and just, thanked everyone and went and sort of basically went home. But I'm walking out of the theatre and I feel this hand on my shoulder, and it's Bob. And he said, "Stop. You were great. We want you on the show." Gave me this card, with a number on it. And he said, "Look, we'll be in touch. Fantastic. Got some ideas for you." And I couldn't believe it. I was 24 years old. I'd been in show business for 2.5 seconds. And I thought, I cannot believe that Bob Monkhouse, the man I see on television every Saturday night, has followed me out into a street and stopped me and said,
"Wow,
I would like you to appear on Opportunity Knocks." It was just
incredible.
Surreal. And therein and thereafter, I suppose that was the beginning of an amazing and cherished acquaintance I had with him for some 18 years thereafter, up to his death. I mean, it wasn't what we would call a deep friendship, but it was that,
Sure.
I'd visit him in dressing rooms, theatres, cabarets, television recordings, and, we swapped letters. He was a beautiful letter writer.
That's fantastic.
So I've got lots of very positive and cheery correspondence from him. But I'm thinking to myself, nobody has to do that. That doesn't give him any material gain. So, anybody who said, well, I didn't really like Bob Monkhouse, I would always say, did you ever see him work live? Did you ever meet him? Well, you might want to just consider those two things before that judgment. You're entitled to your judgment. You may not have liked the manufactured personality that he did use for many, many years on telly.
Yes.
But he admits that, and there are reasons for that. But he did turn honest before it was too late, and I think that brought him to a whole new audience who could see his supreme talent, and he was the governor.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Out of all the comedy acts I've spoken to on this podcast, if they've worked with Bob or they knew Bob, a lot of them tell me of one anecdote of the time where Bob would take them aside. He gave them his time, his advice, and they never forgot that, and so for you to get that sort of off-time screen with him as well, that screen time, it is so nice for him to...
Magic moments. I mean,
yes.
I can't tell you how I can't get over how just cool he was with everything. He was so relaxed. Opportunity knocks. I'd hang around the dressing room, I think even when it wasn't my show, and he'd be in makeup with his... he was rather fond of a glass of Rioja or red wine. I tried that once, by the way. It doesn't work, but he could make it work. And
right.
We were just talking, and he said, "Oh, just hold that, will you?" But he passed me this cup. The wine was in, and he just walked off, did this piece to camera, walked straight back in, took the cup out of my hand, and just carried on the conversation where we left off. And I just thought, how cool is that? How can you just do that? It's incredible.
That is incredible.
He analysed himself as well as other people. I mean, he helped me impersonate him, if that makes sense. I mean, I remember when, look, the impression I did of him on Opportunity Knocks was very embryonic and early on, and I look at it now and cringe. It's nothing like the, hopefully more of an incarnation that I do now. But in those days, I always remember this session, he was going, I'm just trying to think how I do this, Simon. How would I say this? And he was having this conversation with himself about how he might tell this joke and then teach it to me. It was surreal.
Oh, conversational.
I didn't know you had all that history with Bob. It's so nice to hear that in the early days, because what you've done is if you've kept him alive, so to speak, over the past couple of years. You went on to be a reporter and a presenter. You started to work on radio for BBC. Is that you took time out of performing live?
I think that was an opportunity that came up. I was living in Gloucestershire at the time. I'd taken some time away from London, and like all actors and performers, I was doing some teaching as well to pay the bills, and an opportunity came up to join local BBC radio. I think it was probably as a volunteer or to do some kind of trial package with them, and I was allowed out with somebody, and in those days they used to have this Saturday morning radio car where you'd go out in this Renault Espace with like a 300-foot aerial that would go up, and you'd camp up in some muddy field and make it sound like Las Vegas for half an hour, and they come in and you do live inserts into the Saturday morning show. And as I said to you, I just kind of had a natural feel for it, and
for conversation.
When I used to listen to clips back, I go, "Who is that guy?" That's me, right? Okay. And then I never knew where that personality came from, but that ability, as I said to you, that I suppose one hones like being at Butlins. Just if you can talk to anyone about anything, make it sound and feel worthwhile. I mean, I think that's the truth of it.
Genuine.
Ultimately, look, you've got to be yourself. You can't. Radio, I think, is a real diagnostic, and it's hard to be fake on radio. Particularly talk-based radio. So I value that experience and managed to get some training, and eventually ended up presenting shows. I did some cover presenting, which was terrifying because this is all around multitasking. In those days, they had these huge, local radio had these huge,
The desks.
what would you call them, mixing desks,
Yes.
I suppose, called Son Effects, but they were like giant dining room tables with all the Star Trek buttons on. So you had to, the terminology is drive your own program, so you would have to do all the ins and outs,
The jingles.
turning the music in,
Yeah.
and doing the speech as well, and remembering to close your mic when you're talking to somebody about having a cup of tea. And I used to sort of find that quite stressful, and I always thought, oh, if only somebody could drive the desk for me, I think I'd be a much better performer. So I have real admiration for all presenters now, although I think it's got a lot easier with digital. You can do a live show from a laptop these days, but
Yeah, of
it
course.
was hard work in those days. So, but valued the engineering experience because it taught me to make packages, as they'd call them, small features.
Okay.
Jingles, always making jingles for people's programs, and obviously using the impressions as well.
Yes.
So learning how to mix music and audio and all of that stuff, really valuable experience. And whether this, I think local radio's in decline, sadly, because of finances and the BBC's position.
Yeah, they're all merging,
A
aren't
great
they?
learning ground, and even if it's volunteering work, go and do it if you can, because you'll meet interesting people and learn the disciplines of how to make something sound, hopefully, professional.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And ironically, you were in radio, you have to play yourself, and people do get to know your own personality. And as shy as you were hiding behind characters for years.
I think I probably, when I listened to some of the clips back, I think I certainly pushed it up a gear to sound a little bit more jolly than we would
Yes.
in real life.
Of course, yeah.
In fact, somebody once said to me I sounded like Dale Winton on Uppers. That was some feedback I got one morning, but there we go.
That is a high voice. Yeah.
I took that in good faith.
It's kind of strange because you played people that was like Kenneth Williams and Frankie Howard, and they all started out on radio, didn't they? They had these early careers on radio, and now here you are doing their voices.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, what we all realise is radio was king. I mean, in those days, if you go back to Frankie Howard's, as you say, I'm currently playing him in a production that's about to start touring again. But radio was king. I mean, television, when Bob Monkhouse started out, and he would do guest spots on Variety Bandbox in the late 40s, early 50s perhaps, that was, and you only had a couple of channels on the radio, that was it. And it was, it was far more reaching and powerful because television was just evolving.
Yes.
It wasn't. So radio was the place to be, and radio had the power. I still love radio, by the way. I mean, I just do think that mind pictures, are interesting. I think words go deeper sometimes when you can't see the pictures.
Definitely, the listeners get to use their imagination so much more, and I've been listening to so much radio over the past couple of years, and Radio 4 is one of my favourites. And just listen to plays, and it puts all these scenarios and the backdrops in the back of your mind. It's a wonderful platform, isn't it?
Incredible, isn't it?
Yes.
I had to do for Frankie Howard research some of his stand-up spots on Variety Bandbox that were actually written by Eric Sykes, and they're quite surreal. Some of the scenarios, there's sort of this routine about him taking an elephant on the London Underground.
Talk about an elephant in the room.
But these scenarios, but when you hear Frank telling those stories, and of course there are no pictures, it almost makes it funnier because you can just imagine what he's looking like. But not only that, you can actually see the scenario he's in. And I think perhaps if you're watching him talking, you're just focusing on his delivery, whereas in this radio format, you're actually getting the scenario that he's describing, and it's really funny. It's almost like a caricature cartoon.
Definitely. Wow. And I believe that when Peter Brough and Archie Andrews were working on radio, in the next studio was Frankie Howard recording his radio show. It's amazing how all that was firstly a ventriloquist on the radio.
I've always thought that's an astonishing concept.
Wonderful, isn't it? You didn't see his lips move, but you could feel the vibrations of the radio if you sat really close, I believe. But and so Yeah, your work with Frankie Howard. Can we talk a bit about your play? I believe you did this over 10 years ago. Didn't you play Frankie and tour it around the UK? Because I think I saw a poster in Eastbourne at some point.
No. So what happened is, I've done Frankie Howard impressions. Who hasn't? You know, every impressionist did that. But no, the Frankie Project, which is it's actually a play called Howard's End by
Yes.
a really talented actor and writer called Mark Farrelly. This is a very serious story about Frank's clandestine relationship. Frankie Howard was a homosexual, a gay man, and in those days it was illegal.
Yes.
You know, for the former part of his life, and then when it was no longer illegal, it was around reputation and his fan base, and that he could never come out through fear of collateral damage, you know, so really sad. But the story is all around Frank's secret relationship with his partner Dennis Hamer, and he and Dennis lived in secret together for almost 40 years, some 40 years.
Wow.
And Dennis was Frank's chauffeur, manager, cook, cleaner,
Yes.
organizer, lover, everything, yet always had to be kept in the shadows and as a secret. So that's the premise of the play. So this, we managed to actually get it off the ground last October. We did a week's run in a beautiful pub theatre in Camberwell in London called the Golden Goose, and we managed a week there. And on our matinee performance, literally, Boris was announcing that he was going to put the country back into lockdown again. So all our plans got cancelled again. But we're off on the road again in July. We're really pleased about that.
Oh, fantastic.
And it's one hell of a part, Steve, I'll tell you, because everybody knows what Frankie Howard looks like, sounds like. So you've got that big thing to sort of overcome very quickly. And it's a bit like with Bob Monkhouse, really. My view is you have to hit them between the eyes with it in the first 10 seconds, get the buy-in, the believability, and then move on and tell the story. You can't warm people up with characters like that. They're larger than life. And what you can't do is caricature. You can't caricature, not in acting.
No.
It can't be an impression.
That's one thing you don't do is caricature, is it, Simon? You are those people that you play.
Do you know what? I have such affection and admiration for Mike Yarwood. And for me, Mike Yarwood was and will always be sort of the master impressionist. He sort of defined the model of how to do an impression. And by his own explanation, he said, you know, I'll either invent something that I think might enhance that character.
Yes.
It's like Max Bygraves, you know, he used to say, well, I never said I want to tell you a story. That was a Mike Yarwood creation. But equally so, you know, it was about accentuating and, you know, exaggerating to comic effect. So I've done that version of things. But when it came to someone like Bob, I had to look at what Rory Bremner and Yarwood had done and go, well, that's exactly what I mustn't do.
Right.
I mustn't do that.
Okay.
And then it becomes quite a different psychological process. So it helped to know Bob. And then I started doing this thing of, how would Bob say this? How would Bob feel? And I think feel is more important. You start to get inside somebody's mind. Great director, the guy who directed the Monkhouse play that we did in 2015 that did Edinburgh, we did very well up there. But he gave me such a valuable lesson, you know, with acting and this character. He said, when we went into rehearsals, he said, forget Bob Monkhouse. He said, forget what you think he might sound like and all the mannerisms. He said, please, just find the truth in the words. He said, once we've got that sorted out, we'll bring back, you know, the bits you think you're going to need, the armour, you know, the camouflage, the vocal sounds, the tics, the whatever. And I just thought that was such useful advice. So with the Frankie Howard play, it's the same thing. It's not the Mrs. Shut Your Face. Of course we've got some of that stuff in there, and hopefully it sounds fairly realistic, but it's all around truth and finding the truth in those words. And I think if you go at it from that approach, that's when the goosebumps and the hairs stand up, because people go, oh my God, that's so real.
Yeah.
Well, that's right, because I'm doing it for real. It's not an impression.
And what a way to learn about somebody's, you know, from inside out, really. You're getting to know that person so deeply that you'll be able to portray them perfectly when you go out there. And you do want to believe that you are that person, because the audience have to believe it, and so I guess you really have to know everything about him, to play him, whether it's Frankie or Bob.
Yeah, I mean, research is, I think, invaluable. I mean, there's nothing worse than seeing somebody trying to portray a character when they've clearly not researched them very deeply. And obviously Bob Monkhouse, I mean, I've known him, I know everything that most people know about him,
yes.
And that counts for a lot. And ditto with Frankie Howard. I mean, I did meet Frankie several times, so I've had experience of actually shaking his hand and sort of can remember that vividly, but also read everything and talked to lots of people. Barry Cryer has been so helpful. We saw him a couple of years ago, and he sort of gave some input into the play and his anecdotes. Every time you hear somebody who tells an anecdote, I always feel it's another layer, it's another piece of information. You're like a detective, you're sort of assimilating all these little details.
Yeah, you're right.
And then when it's time to turn it into something, you draw on that. You draw on that information.
Definitely.
I don't know whether you do this with your characters, but I mean, certainly from acting, if I'm playing Bob, or now it's Frankie at the moment, although there is a very interesting Bob project coming up that I might be allowed to tell you about a little bit later on.
Oh, fantastic.
But I have to actually see Frankie when I'm doing this. So what I end up doing is actually, I'm just stepping out slightly. I'm probably about 2 or 3 feet away from myself, looking at Frankie Howard. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes.
It's a bit disorientating at times, but that's how I do it. And I'm replaying carry-on films, or I'm replaying something I've seen in Up Pompeii, and I'm going, right, that's the facial expression we're going to use here.
No, that's so detailed. Yeah, but it works for you. And that's truly incredible.
Eyes and teeth.
To play these people, obviously you admired them as well, so it must be heartwarming for you to be actually paying tribute to them in the way that you do.
That's an interesting observation, and I agree with you in the sense that, I have such deep affection for Bob Monkhouse, and will do forevermore until I'm unable to have any affection for anyone. But in terms of Frankie Howard, I didn't know him in the same way.
Yes.
And I found him funny as a performer, but when I actually met him in real life, I didn't like him. And so he wasn't somebody I liked or had that sort of affinity with. So it was a much harder process. And I remember talking to Mark around the preparation for this character, and it took me a long while to sort of think, I'm going to like him, because that's the only way I'm going to get inside his psyche, is I've got to like him. He used to make me laugh.
Yes.
But I also knew he in real life, he was a very complex, sometimes I suppose we could say unpleasant character at times. He
Yeah.
could be very rude.
That's interesting.
To people and unfriendly, but we've all got our characteristics, but that's up to him.
Bad days.
Not somebody that you would warm to, I suppose, in real life.
No.
So he was harder to access, I suppose.
Okay, I see. I did read his biography. It's quite a big chunky. It was at The Life of Frankie Howard, and it was quite a big chunky book. And there's a dark side, isn't there? And so it must be quite difficult to, obviously, relate to that dark side. And you've got to know him after his death, which is obviously kind of difficult to portray as a character than completely different to Bob Monkhouse, which is
Yeah, I had a lot of synergy with Bob because his relationship with particularly with his mother, his estranged mother as it was really,
yes,
and with his father, I get all of that. I had a similar experience as a child, and that was one of the reasons I sort of took to comedy and performing as an escapism. That if it's the tears, the broken-hearted clown cliche, but I'm sorry to say,
yes,
there's so much truth in that and gravitas that if you can't get the love at home, you will go out and find some approval somewhere else. And
wow,
I get that side with Bob. I mean, with Frankie Howard, it was far more complicated and agonising. He was, I think, a very neurotic man. I think his sexuality messed him up massively. I have a lot of sympathy for him because of, there's a really sad story where he's quoted for saying, if I could take a pill to cure my homosexuality, I would. He found it a wretched existence.
Yes.
Yet could do nothing about it. And I find that very sad. Very sad indeed.
Wow, that is sad.
Oh! Ooh, controversial.
I actually heard a conversation with Bob Monkhouse on Desert Island Discs, and I got quite emotional, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, I got quite emotional hearing about, his childhood and his mother and the relationship. Very sad to hear that about Bob, who has given us so much as an audience, so much laughter and love, through the screen. And then he never had it when he was a child. So that's another emotional story, isn't it, in a different way?
Oh, massively. And I think people, he created his response to that pain and that way of dealing with things was to manufacture positivity, something that one of his lovely quotes is that he just sort of felt he was unable to sort of get depressed about things, and that's interesting, that program, that Desert Island Disc you refer to, because the majority of the pieces on that are all quite melancholy, like Ravel's Pavane for a Dead Princess is one of the items. They're very sort of soulful, slow pieces, and I think he was quite attracted to that, because I think he sort of said, I'm incapable of feeling sadness and depression, I've got this sort of Teflon coating. But no, I think his response was to create, there's this lovely story of Bob. Well, I say lovely, it's indicative of his story, but he's he had quite a wealthy middle-class background. His father was a chartered accountant, and his grandfather ran this custard and jelly company, so there was pots of money and pots of jam as well, but he somehow felt unloved, and there's sort of stories around how that came about. So he apparently had a maid who worked for them, and he was taken to see a film, 1936, 34, 36, I don't know, George Formby appearing in Boots at his local cinema in Penge or something.
Okay.
And he recounts in his autobiography this, he said, that was the moment. I just saw this thing, I heard the laughter, I felt the warmth, and he thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be the cause of that laughter. And I just thought that was really powerful. And I think he therefore set around on this whole project, this journey of becoming the comedian. I know he was tremendously successful as a television game host and a presenter.
Yes.
But I think his true backbone was being a stand-up comedian and the science and energy of comedy. He said he didn't think he had funny bones. He relied on lines and delivery. There may be some truth in that. I think he was deeply humorous in real life, but he wasn't perhaps as vulnerable. I think if you can show yourself up to be vulnerable, people will laugh. If you come out and you are immaculate and it's all word perfect and you look like you had 3 square meals a day, in those northern clubs where people will cut their teeth, maybe people don't want to see that, because maybe people want to see that you too struggle, like they do. So therefore, Tommy Cooper looking dishevelled, that's okay. Frankie Howard with a suit that doesn't quite fit and he's telling you all his troubles, you sort of sense his agony. Okay, I'm going to let you in because you're not a threat. I feel there's a little bit of sympathy here. So I think Bob sort of modelled himself on the American humour. We're told that Bob used to listen to a crystal radio set when the Doodlebug bombs were dropping back in Beckenham way back.
Wow.
And he was listening to American Forces radio. So you can imagine as a child all that kind of dialogue going in his ears. So I'm not surprised he sort of came up with this slightly mid-Atlantic accent and this slick urbane style.
Yes.
And he was very impressed with Bob Hope, who I think he modelled himself on originally, shall we say. And that's, I think, how this kind of Monkhouse armoury came about, that people either really thought was great or they disliked. And he was Marmite Monkhouse. You either were there. He always said, look, it's 50-50, but if I can get 51% of the audience liking me, he said, I'm the director of the company, I've won, I'm happy.
That's a nice analogy, isn't it? Now, I had the pleasure in the past of being directed by the wonderful Paul Hendy for pantomime, and
Paul, terrific guy.
2013, and obviously last year I shared and I spread this like wildfire when I saw it. I was blown away.
when I got to see you play Bob Monkhouse in The Last Laugh. This is a great film piece. I think it's on YouTube now. It's written and directed by Paul, and it won the Best Comedy Drama at Los Angeles Independent Film Festival, and you won Best Supporting Actor at Sydney Independent Film Festival and Best Actor at Discovery Film Festival. So this piece with Bob Golding as Eric Morecambe, Damien Williams as Tommy Cooper, to bring these three together was genius, wasn't it? It's such a... Because that never happened in the dressing room, but because it's... Obviously, I won't give away the ending because I'm going to spread the clip after, but it's so poignant and wonderful.
It's a beautiful piece of writing. I mean, just such credit to Paul. I think he's had it on the back burner for many, many years, and he'd obviously had Bob Golding. I think he'd actually produced a tour of Bob playing Eric Morecambe in Tim Whitnell's Morecambe play.
Indeed, yeah.
And obviously he worked with Damien for many years and knew, because I think Damien had actually played Tommy Cooper in a live production as well previously. Right. But the missing link was he'd never had his Bob Monkhouse actor. And through me working with Bob back in 2015 on the Monkhouse play, that was the connection, that was the missing link, and then that's how the project sort of got legs, really. But you're right, it's a beautiful introspective of... And we don't know, no one can really ever know what might have been said in that dressing room, but I think it's a very good punt at sort of speculating how they would talk. You know what dressing rooms are like. They've got their own energy and magnetism and laws and properties. Dressing rooms are strange places. Strange things happen in dressing rooms. You know, it's nerves, it's elation, it's deflation, it's all sorts of things. It's preparation. They're strange places. They're like station platforms. But just for a few moments to get those three guys together and have that debate. I think he wrote it beautifully. He's even hinting there might be a stage version of it. Who knows if that would ever happen? But
that would be incredible.
It would be an amazing thing.
Yes, it would. I could see yourself playing Kenneth Williams, Frankie Howard, and Bob Monkhouse on it. Obviously not on stage, but I think as you playing those three on a digital or a TV platform. Wouldn't that be incredible to bring them three together as well? And there's so many ideas you could do when you watch something like The Last Laugh.
Here's the thing. I think The Last Laugh works, and it worked in America, and the Americans didn't know Bob Monkhouse, Eric Morecambe, and Tommy Cooper particularly.
Yes.
And that's, I suppose, the mark of a good piece of drama, a good film. It works. It stands... The fact it could stand without people knowing. I just wonder if you talk of lots of ideas, and you're right, there are lots of ideas, but whether there's... I don't know, I'm not cynical, I'm just asking the question, is there a dying audience in terms of how far back, how many times can we keep going back looking at these old masters of mirth? Because eventually we're going to get to a point where it really is
there's no audience
history, and we're going to be like the Egyptians and the Aztecs. I don't know. Is there an audience for it still? Well, perhaps there is, perhaps there isn't. I don't know.
I've just recently been asked to be a patron of the Max Miller Appreciation Society, so I believe Bob Monkhouse met Max Miller once.
Oh yes, he did. He sold him jokes, actually.
Yes, entrepreneur in those early years. But these societies of Tommy Cooper, Morecambe and Wise, I believe they're still out there. People still want to hold on to those memories and those shows that they grew up with. But even younger generations that get to see it at Christmas, say Morecambe and Wise. My children have watched Laura and Hardy and Chaplin in my home, and they laugh and they love. And I think it's up to us to pass it on, I believe, to another generation, which is... I understand what you're saying. Is it going to fizzle out? Like ventriloquism, is it a dying art? Can you revamp it, or can you just... Is it just about keeping those people's memories alive by doing what you do and doing what I do, writing books and things?
I think it all comes from passion and dedication and love, frankly, and you have that for your craft. and I have it for the characters that I portray. I suppose where there aren't memories, perhaps we create them. I mean, a lovely example of this is with the Frankie Howard character that I'm currently doing. Some of the feedback we got from our run last October, there were people who turned up who were of the age group who remembered Frankie Howard, so they'd come to see Frankie Howard. There were people who come to see a play called Howard's End who'd never seen Frankie Howard. They didn't know who Frankie Howard was, but at the end of it, they were informed as to who Frankie Howard was. They thought he was a really fascinating, funny, weird guy, and they really enjoyed a story being told. So I think perhaps we look at it in that way, that these are cherished goods, these old performers, and does it matter if people don't remember them or know who they are? Do we have a role in informing people and introducing them, to these people?
Definitely, and it's and you're doing a wonderful job to do that. Can you tell us? So Howard's End, that goes out in July, and you're touring around the UK, or have you got select dates?
Yes, after about four goes of rescheduling it, as I'm sure you've had this with gigs,
Sure.
It's just a nightmare. So we sort of Mark's producing it as well, and he's just phenomenal. He tours his own work. I mean, he does this amazing play called Naked Hope, which is all about the life of Quentin Crisp. It's a one-man play.
Okay.
So he's very well connected with venues around the UK. So we've got a lovely run in Cambridge. I think it's the 15th of July. We've got about 3 or 4 shows there at a beautiful new venue called the Town and Gown. We're up to the Lichfield Garrick Theatre.
Okay.
Nice. September. We're doing a week's run at the Old Joint Stock in Birmingham. Various dates. I think just before Christmas in December, we're doing a couple of nights at the Museum of Comedy, which is a very small venue. Perhaps you played there.
I'm there in October, actually.
But somehow I think Frankie might do very well there.
Yes.
So, there's a lot of interest in it. We got some good press just in that little week.
Fantastic.
It was so funny, Steve, because, everyone's in masks. It's quite difficult playing for laughs when you've got, you can't see that expression on people's faces. You just have to read eyes. Funnily enough, you can still hear laughter. Even with the masks on, you do still hear it.
You can. Sometimes I've had people in audiences with the visors that you could see through, where when they're laughing because they all steam up and their face disappears for a few seconds. And I've had that, which is rewarding.
Does Arthur wear a mask, by the way? I didn't mean to ask.
Well, if my ventriloquism starts to slide, I may leave mine on when I go on. But it's no, he's made out of cloth, Arthur, so he doesn't need another one.
Distinct advantage, definitely.
Yes. I've really enjoyed talking to you today, Simon. I'm a big fan of yours. Your work is incredible. And I saw loads of clips, obviously, recently. And I saw a Monkhouse show that you did. And there's a lovely clip online of you singing as Bob Monkhouse. And to be able to sing like that person as well, that can't be easy. You don't ever break character. It's wonderful.
No, I could probably put over a song reasonably well as Bob, but singing as Simon, I'd be useless. It's like the Mike Yarwood syndrome. He could hold a tune very well in character, and then those immortal words would come, and this is me. And we all go, right, okay, roll the credits.
Yes.
No, I'm only kidding. Being somebody else is easier.
I'm the same with my dummy. Arthur Lager sings a song called Helping Hand. We do it at the end of the show. I would never sing at the end of my show, but someone wrote this song for me. They saw something in the song and the dummy, and it works. It works with him singing it, and it's poignant. But I met Mike Yarwood at my first show back after this final lockdown. And so I met Mike at Brinsworth House. I'd done a performance for them. It was my first show back, and he was sat at the back of the room. And I saw him turn to one of the residents there and stick his thumb up, as if to say, it's going well. This guy is good. He came in the dressing room at the end of the show and congratulated me. And it was wonderful to meet such a, just a great performer. And I've seen a lot. I was reading his biography at the time, and this is me. And what a great life and life of impressions that he led. It was incredible.
I mean, if you think back to the 70s, I know you're a little bit younger than me, but I mean, he was you know, if you look at his viewing figures, okay, everybody says yes, but there are only 2 channels, 3 channels in those days. Doesn't matter. I mean, Morecambe and Wise, Mike Yarwood, to some extent, Dick Emery. But, you know, they were commanding millions and millions of viewers. And Mike, you look at his biography, I mean, he had many, many series at the top, you know.
Yes.
And you can't stay at the top forever. The game changed. That's it. You either change with it, which Bob did, or you don't. And I think as an impressionist, it's really hard, which is why I admire, you know, Rory, John Culshaw. These guys keep chasing it and they can stay fresh. But if you think about it, you've got your set act.
Yes.
I always felt sorry for Mike, because when those prime ministers start to retire or die, you know, that's it, game over. You have to then go on and do the work and develop something else. It's like your act has to almost get thrown away.
Rewrite
And
it.
that's a huge pressure.
Yeah,
A real pressure.
Must be a big blow. The last performance that Bob Monkhouse did, it was the last stand that he did. It was very poignant. It was a sad moment, that, wasn't it? And it must have broke your heart to watch, you know, knowing that this was his last performance. And it's hard to watch, actually, because knowing that he's not going to work again. But it was a huge, you know, it was a saddened loss of Bob, even for me as an admirer of his. The chat show host, Family Fortunes, Opportunity Knocks, Celebrity Squares. I grew up watching all that. He was gag writer, but he was just such a great gag teller, wasn't he? And you pay such a respectful tribute to his memory. So on behalf of all my voices,
Thank you.
I thank you for doing what you're doing, because you are bringing him back to us. It is heartwarming. It's a wonderful thing what you've done.
It's been a labour of love for many, many years. Funnily enough, I tell a story about. I mean, I agree with you when you see that final performance at the Albany, you know, and he's looking tired, he's looking very unwell, and you know, he's 3 months away from dying, basically.
Yeah, yes.
So yeah, that's pretty heavy to conceive as an idea. I don't think he saw it in that way. Typically, you know, he just saw it as an opportunity to do a really good quality performance, and there may have been more thoughts behind that. But shortly before he actually died, I remember I still have this beautiful letter, and I think the story was with his, because he had prostate cancer, I believe you may know, but
yes.
he tried to keep it from the press for almost 2 years until he couldn't keep it a secret anymore. It was the secret. And I remember him writing this beautiful letter, and he said, "Oh look, I've just got back from Barbados. There's all this stuff in the press around me being unwell." He said, "Don't you believe it?" You know, he said, I'm fine. Usual charming letter. And then he said, "By the way, rest assured, if there's any work I can push your way, I will."
Oh,
and that was the very last communication I had from Bob. And then he died, and there was a gap of a few years. And then the next really big project I did was actually I was approached to voice him in this reconstruction of the Bob Monkhouse prostate cancer advertisement, where they'd actually brought him back to life, and
yes.
He's talking in a graveyard about prostate cancer, etc. So
wow.
I've always found that quite a sort of an ironic scenario.
Yes,
that,
from his last
kept
words.
his promise, you know, but I end up doing an impression of him.
Wow, yeah, we can't top that, can we? So,
well, he kept his word.
And what wonderful words.
There was a project in the pipeline, and I don't want to tempt fate.
Sure.
Because as soon as you start sharing things, sometimes buttons fall off the wall. But we have a film in the pipeline that is going to be really, really interesting, charting Bob's sort of more early life and relationship with Dennis Goodwin, his writer.
Brilliant.
So there'll be more to say about that, hopefully, next time we speak. So just as I thought Bob, I had laid him to rest, somebody has come to me, they have the budget, they have the enthusiasm, so I'm not going to say no. But I think it will be the swan song.
Yeah.
But I'll keep you posted.
Well, we can't wait for that. Well, we can't wait I'm going to come out and see your Frankie Howard piece as well. Can't wait to see that. Yeah, we'll do. And if it comes to Eastbourne, I'll spread it around here, because I'm down in Eastbourne now, where you won your talent competition, where we like you down here. So,
but do you know what? I did three performances of Monkhouse there in 2015 at the Devonshire Park Theatre.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you, That's the first time I've ever worked on a rake stage, and I got vertigo. I nearly fell over. I couldn't get my head around it.
It's hard there, isn't it? I've worked there.
The idea of that slope and that gradient, it's so disorientating if you're not used to it, and I certainly wasn't. It took me 2 performances to sort of think, right, I'm not going to fall over in the pit. But what a charming theatre, and I love that little book in the entrance where everybody's signed it. It's just a really nice, warm family theatre. I do hope they're okay and they've survived COVID and can carry on doing stuff.
Yes, I believe they're opening for Panto this year, but I think that's it. But there's a couple of theatres around here: Congress Theatre, Hippodrome Theatre, and I have a few shows there coming up. But it's it's wonderful, and thank you for sharing all of this with us. Really, really appreciate your time, Simon, and your vocals. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and you know what a pleasure it is to catch one of your last podcasts, and thrilled that you thought I was interesting enough. That's very sweet of you.
Bless you. Thank you, Simon Cartwright.
Take good care, and thanks very much for the invite.
Eyes and Teeth.
Thank you so much to Simon and Bob. It was difficult to tell. To see more of Simon's work, then go to his website, simoncartwright.co.uk. You can find him on Facebook as Simon Cartwright and on Twitter at simplysimon321. While you're here, if you haven't seen it yet, then take 20 minutes out of your day to watch The Last Laugh with Tommy, Eric and Bob. You won't be disappointed. It's a piece of visual magic you won't regret watching. Today's quote, of course, comes from Bob Monkhouse. I'd like to die like my old dad, peacefully in his sleep, not screaming like his passengers. Eyes and Teeth is written, produced and hosted by Steve Hewlett, vocals by Lola, Larissa and Nina Hewlett, additional vocals by Rich T. The Eyes and Teeth music and jingles are produced and performed by Kevin Dean. Tune in for the penultimate edition of Season 9 when I talk to the great talents of Adam Day.